I was very lucky to see Everything perform at Alexandra Palace last year. Was it last year?
It was March.
Recently.
March this year.
And that was your biggest show to date as a band. Could you let us know, how did you guys get from playing the Dry Bar in Manchester to Alexandra Palace?
Yeah, very, very, very gradually over 10 years, basically. We've never had that kind of firework moment. It's all been barely perceptible, vaguely in the right direction. And I think the motion is less detectable for those of us in the band even than it is for everybody else. So I think on the outside perception, things kind of move in the right direction quite dramatically, but for us it's been a very slow, gradual grind. And I guess potted history, formed the band out of university 11 years ago, started playing any gig that would have us. In the old-fashioned way, I used to circle the names of promoters and venues in the back of the NME and phone them, because they would still print the phone numbers in those days, and see if they would give us a gig, see if we could get the money for the petrol, and we learned to play together that way, really. And this was in the MySpace days as well, so we sort of started to attract a team via the music we were putting online. Initially we had a lawyer, which we thought was ridiculous because we didn't have the money to pay our rent, but we had a lawyer.
Was that your first team member?
Yeah, but even before management, and then he put us in touch with our first management, and who then obviously made it his business to get us signed, which we did, and we signed to Geffen, which was a imprint of Polydor, at the end of 2009, and it was a relatively traditional major label record deal for a band, and they were very few and far between then, and they're even more so now. I say relatively traditional, it was a 360, of course, because everything was by then. And then we made our first album in 2010, that came out, and it was top 20, but it wasn't like one of those records like the XX had at that time, where almost everything they've done subsequently has been dwarfed by the success of that record, so we've never really had that over-magnified experience from any one of our albums. We've always been enabled by our previous records, but not throttled by them in any way. So that's been helpful, and we've suddenly 4 albums in, 11 years.
So in a way, the fact that the success was incremental was a really good thing.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, we're not wealthy people, but we've been able to call it our living for almost that entire time, for the last 9 years. And we haven't worked any day jobs in that time, although obviously we did it all the time leading up to it. And that in itself, I think, is a measure of success for me, at least. I think if you can call it your living and you're still basically able to make the music that you want to, and you're still relevant to yourself and to your audience, and you're still provoking people, then that is success, really.
Absolutely, I double underline that. So in that journey, to me, every time I learn about everything's journey, I find it remarkable that you seem to have the same team, right, throughout that time, or were there change-ups?
There have been key players, but no, apart from the band, none of us from literally day one. Our first A&R, who signed us to Geffen in 2009, is now our manager. We've only ever had 2 managers, and he's our second manager. So he signed us to Geffen, and then the whole team crossed the floor to Sony, and we were the only act they took with them on our second album, which was an amazing piece of luck for us. And there have been a lot of those, actually, as the panel touched on before, which we can talk about as well. But and then, he became our second manager. But the lawyer has remained the same. We've had 2 or 3 agents in that time. We've had 2 guitarists, you know. So but for a long time now, it's been pretty consistent.
So can you talk a little bit about, were there any moments in that stretch of 10 years where, throughout that time,
God, all the time.
Can you talk about the nitty-gritty stuff? Like when was it really difficult? Personally, perhaps,
really
or from a business point of view?
2009, when we were working so much as a band that we couldn't really go to work for money, but we weren't really earning any money as a band. So
right.
we would be touring in our transit van, and we couldn't book hotels because we didn't have the money to until we got the fee from the gig. So we'd have to wait for the £60 cash or whatever, and then phone all the travel lodges and see if we could get a family room which technically you're only allowed 4 or 3 people in, and 5 of us would be in there. So we'd have our driver and tour manager in there with us, and then we'd have this elaborate scheme where we'd have to sort of bamboozle them by going backwards and forwards to the van enough. And we couldn't even do £10 a day PD, so we would do quarter PD.
Is that why you wear the same jacket, so you could kind of zip in and out of the hotel?
All that stuff, yeah, hiding in sleeping bags and stuff. So that 5 of us could sleep in one room. And yeah, you could get a beer and a burger from Wetherspoons for £5. So we would share one of those between 2. And that would be like the meal of the day. And the rest of the time we were just subsisting on lager and crisps, and that much remains.
Well, I'm glad you survived that.
I enjoyed it. That was the best bit in lots of ways, because it was all new as well. That was the fun thing about it.
So was all the development and all the sort of positive, like the buzz and that things were increased, was that all, did that feel real and good and exciting enough to calm those nerves of,
oh, definitely.
We haven't been paid
yet. We were
still
young and idealistic and hopeful, and we really believed in the music, and we really enjoyed what we were doing, and there was always something to work towards. There was always a particular show on the horizon, or we were going to meet this label, or we were going to put out this 7-inch or whatever. There was always something to kind of keep the momentum up until we kind of settled into the more sort of traditional rhythm and had some funding, I suppose.
Any tips for keeping the band a tight unit?
Patience and loyalty and tenacity, and I mean that's something that we're still learning, I think, because it's not something that ends. You know, we're still together after 11 years, and we want to do it for another 11 years and another 11 years. I mean, ask the Rolling Stones, how have they done it? I think maybe by not travelling or talking to each other. But
I don't think they stay in a family room anymore.
Not anymore, no. I'm sure they did their time, though. I mean, people diversify as they get older, and the trick is to harness that to the good, really, rather than allow it to divide you. And we've, so far, just about managed that.
Wonderful. And there's still, there's so much more to achieve. It must be really exciting to be able to look back on 10 years, but then also look forward and have all these goals.
Yeah, we do find ourselves at this particular kind of break point, I suppose, in our career, because there have been 4 albums. We're suddenly in our sort of mid-30s, early mid-30s, I hasten to add. And so, and it's been over a decade, and all of this has kind of crept up on us, and we didn't really know it was coming. And so, you can't help but feel a bit kind of wistful, I suppose. Like, there's been a lot of sort of reflective mood recently amongst the 4 of us.
Nice segue to the next question, which is about failure.
Good.
Not really failure, though, because one thing we talked about so much on the panel about failure now was creative risk, taking creative risk. And I think one of the key reasons why you've had such a great run is that as a band, you have a sound, you really knew what kind of a sound you wanted to create, and made a very conscious decision to sound completely different to everything from Manchester at that time and everything that was kind of happening and going on. So could you tell us a little about what that process was like, and did it feel like a big risk to you at the time? Or
it didn't really feel like a big risk to us. It felt completely natural, because we would just be bored, and I think it would have felt disingenuous and short-sighted to just chase whatever trends were happening at that time. So this was like end of mid-2000s, what's since been perhaps unfairly maligned as landfill indie, although loads of it was awful. And there was a time when if you had a leather jacket and a guitar and a regional accent, you could be signed to a major. And we didn't think that all of that was terribly exciting. Loads of it was good. I mean, the Strokes were an amazing band, and like every amazing band, what came in their wake was loads of dross, and we were kind of living out that period. But things had already started to change with like the Claxons and Foals, who just had more ideas, and they were sort of knocking the doors down at radio anyway before we started. So things were on the turn. In the local context, because we were a Manchester band based in Manchester, having been at university there, it was only in the original kind of factory record spirit that we wanted to do things, which was about modernism and radicalism. And doing something new and always moving forward and futurism, and it wasn't what Factory has become known for, which is this sort of navel-gazing, retrogressive, black and yellow stripes thing, which is tourism. You know, that's it's not really a musical culture anymore. And there was this period in Manchester where there's always stuff going on in Manchester. There's always new stuff happening, but it was really difficult to get the London-centric music media to recognise any development beyond the kind of Oasis era, because that was their version of Manchester. The commissioning editors at various publications in London had been of that generation, and that was their version of Manchester. They'd got on the train, they'd come to the Hacienda in 88, and they'd gone to see Oasis at Main Road in 96, and as far as they were concerned, everything was still there. And this was over 10 years later, and we were begging to differ, basically.
So did you have to contend with much of...
Yeah, a bit. I mean, we still do. I mean...
People asking why you're not wearing leather jackets.
80,000 tickets in an hour and a half the other day, I think. I mean, you can't change Manchester that much, it turns out. But I think we knew that there was always going to be a commercial ceiling on what we did because of who we were and the music we made. I mean, we could have ironed out a lot more and maybe got further commercially, but what's the point? The whole thing is hollow as soon as you start doing that.
Yeah. You'll end up being miserable.
Yeah.
And now everyone's...
And it's also quite short-lived, I think. The road is littered with the corpses of artists who have chased trends and made a quick buck for 9 months, and then they die. Whoever's doing the live tweeting. So many amazing metaphors. I suppose that's what you get when you've got a conference full of musicians on stage. I have one more question for you before we open up to your questions. And really only because I know that this is something like dear to your heart. And you mentioned tourism. So speaking of tourism or touring or touring, should we talk about Brexit? Okay.
Quickly. What are your concerns when that day comes from an artist point of view?
Innumerable, but principally that we won't be able to tour on the mainland because that's trade and that's freedom of movement, and those things are not guaranteed. And in fact, the latter is completely out of the question as it stands. So, I mean, much has been made in our industry, but maybe not outside of it, about what we are as an economic force to this country. Despite no kind of grassroots funding from government, we contribute 4.4 billion, and we're rightly very proud of the culture and I guess the money, or at least the government is, but we can't expect that to continue if we can't export the goods being the music, and we just simply won't be able to tour anymore. Anybody who's ever applied for an American visa will know.
Who in the room has been through that fun process?
How costly and expensive and time-consuming that is. So if we're going to have to do that every 60 miles across Northern Europe, from Calais into Belgium, into Holland, into Germany and Denmark, it's just not going to happen. And younger artists don't have the resources and certainly don't have the money to make that happen. And we were lucky because we were able to get over the water really early on in our career, and it's not just, it's not really about the money. We don't really make money touring Europe. We can just about make it wash its face, but it's about the cultural exchange aspect as well, which nobody talks about. And the same thing is going to happen the other way around as well. We're not going to be able to see Daft Punk, you know?
Why wasn't that on a bus?
Or Kraftwerk, or... It should have been on the ballot. Yeah. It's just those opportunities are already fading. We heard about what happened at I can't remember which festival it was now, but loads of was it WOMAD had to cancel loads of acts because they couldn't make it happen.
Wow. So what can we do? Might be a good moment to give the FAC a shout out, who under the umbrella of UK Music are petitioning for free movement for artists.
Well, that's one potential outcome, isn't it? That we have a special dispensation for visas or whatever, which means you don't have to stop and declare every piece of equipment you've got in the trailer at every border in Europe. Because when we've routed European tours in the past, the first shows to go, for bureaucratic and administrative reasons, are the Swiss ones, because it's the little armoured enclave in the centre of Europe. You can't bring merch in. They want to know about everything in the trailer, and if every single country is going to be like that, then it's just not going to happen. It just won't do it anymore. So then we need some way to sort of sidestep all of those costs and that administration, I think.
So sign up to the FAC, make your voice known, call your local politicians.
Totally.
Jeremy, I'm sorry to end on such a downer.
That's right.
Thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. Would anyone like to ask a non-Brexit question?
Hi, Chris.
Hey, once you knew you were going to sign a major deal, did you have a paper agreement within the band, or did you sign a band agreement first?
Between the four of us?
Yeah.
I think maybe we'd already done that as a business anyway, I think, and decided things like what happens if somebody dies, who owns the name, things like that I think we'd already got that out the way early on, I think. Yeah.
And you did it on paper?
I think so. I should probably check. We did do that, yeah, but that wasn't actually part of the record deal. I think that was just something we did as part of the sort of company's house process to set up a company in the first place.
Was that something that your lawyer facilitated at the time?
Yeah, definitely. We wouldn't have done that of our own accord.
Is there another question? Jake, feel free to pick, because I can't see.
Hello.
Hear me, can you? You can.
Okay.
Yeah, obviously your music is very original. How have you stuck with that level of originality and still maintained, pretty decent success?
I don't know. I suppose we've always enjoyed the discipline of the balance between what we hope will get played on the radio versus the number of ideas that we want to fit into that sort of 3 minutes, 15-second, 3 choruses.
Which is quite a lot, isn't it?
Which is quite a lot. It's quite stressful sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think we enjoy pop music and we enjoy the discipline of making singles, and it's a bit like what we were talking about before in the previous panel, the 3 hits thing. We don't really have any hits per se, but we've definitely known what the singles are as we're making an album. And equally, as Dave said, we've enjoyed the freedom on the stuff where we know, well, this isn't going to go to radio, so we don't really have those concerns here. But there is a separate discipline that I think engage a different part of our brains where we do actually want to get the first chorus in within the first minute, because that's kind of fun as well. So there is a certain acknowledgement of commercial traditions, I suppose, or constraint, but that doesn't have to be restrictive or cynical.
Have you changed the way you write songs, or do you go through the same processes?
Wise, yeah, we have actually. I mean, all the albums have been different in that respect. The first album was basically Jonathan demoing stuff in MIDI, and then we'd kind of unpick the songs as a live band, tour them a lot. I mean, all of the songs on the first record we'd of course been playing for 2 years anyway as a sort of scrappy live band. And in those days, even the songs that didn't really make it to Man Alive, which was the first record, the whole thing was sort of being really, really quick and tight and loud and not very good songwriting, just shock and awe. And some of that sensibility went into Man Alive, and then we got more interested in the actual craft of writing songs, but because we've been touring a lot off the back of our first record, we wrote much more as a live band for the second album. And then the third album, this newer process whereby Alex and John would take the songs quite far as a back and forth between them, or Alex was writing instrumental stuff and John would top line it, and then we would get into the rehearsal room as a secondary stage. That started then. And the fourth album really rolled out of touring the third. We almost didn't break stride because we were conscious of how long it had taken us to hit our stride writing our third record. So as soon as we started touring the third album, we were writing the fourth as well, and using any downtime we had in the touring to attack the songs in our own rehearsal space and studio, because staring down the barrel of loads of one or the other, the tyranny of the blank page, or 9 months just playing these 15 songs is quite daunting. So the luxury of being able to mix the two together is quite rare, and that's something that really only happens at the beginning of a career, unless you can engineer it later on. So we did try to do a bit of that then. Sorry, it was a very long answer.
No, it's great. It's very interesting. I think we've got time for one more question.
Hello.
Hey. If you were 21 now and you're in Manchester and you're starting over, but it's going into next year, how would you go about it? What would you do?
Great question. Thank you.
Yeah, see, I can't tell you what it's like to be a new artist in 2018 because it's been such a long time. But I think I would ultimately, I mean, we probably wouldn't have a MySpace account anymore. It doesn't really work.
I mean, that would be a real risk to take.
email address instead of Hotmail, things like that. But I think we'd still basically attack it in the same way. We'd still want to be playing live, and that was as much about as a process of us learning to play together as it was putting ourselves out there. So I think we'd still do that. I would still advise people to do that as much as they can. Certainly, if you identify as a band in the sort of four blokes with guitar sense that we sort of vaguely still do. But one of the reasons that I enjoy being involved with the Featured Artists Coalition and other organisations and things like this is because I don't know what it's like for 18-year-old kids now, and I'd like to learn from them how it's differed since I was that age.
So when all these platforms came along, Instagram and Twitter, is that something that you as a band were excited about and sort of took on really naturally, or did a manager come and say?
No, I mean we're pragmatic about that stuff. Any of the platforms that allow you to create an identity, upload videos and music, that's useful, and we definitely were like in the sweet spot with MySpace, and that was our platform because it was 2007, 8, and then everything subsequently has just been a perfectly useful promotional tool, and sometimes a nice way to lift the lid on things a bit, and the fans like that. But we don't really see that as a key to our output or success or career or anything like that, really. It's just there, isn't it? It's a good way to tell people what's happening.
Yeah.
It's a mouthpiece, I suppose.
It's really wonderful because a big theme of today has sort of been just making sure that we all remember that actually taking the time to get the music right and to trust your creative gut is the way forward.
That is the only thing when people say, what's your one piece of advice? And the one piece of advice is just to keep making the music that you're making and let it be about you and your identity and not to chase trends because, as we said before, the road is littered with corpses. Which is maybe a bit of an extreme way to put it, but I think that's the thing really. If you success will come to you if what you're doing is good and if it's true as well, and crucially it will be long lasting if what you've carved out is your own niche and your own identity. If you are borrowing somebody else's, it's not going to last you long.
Beautiful. Well, that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Can we have a round of applause?